Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Melbourne Town Hall, where for the first of the third series of debates, we've managed to have the audience spill up from the floor and start to fill the upper reaches of the hall. So it's wonderful to have you here tonight. On behalf of St James Ethics Centre, the Wheeler Centre, the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, The Age, the City of Melbourne and the ABC, all of whom have worked together to make this event possible, I'd like to welcome you here to the Town Hall, as I say, for the first debate in our third season. Tonight we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my personal respects to their elders and to the other elders of other communities who might be here tonight. My name is Simon Longstaff. I'm the Executive Director of St James Ethics Centre, and I'm delighted to chair tonight's debate. Now, I should mention that later on in the proceedings there will be an opportunity for you within the audience to contribute to the debate, speaking for up to a minute for or against the proposition if you're minded so to do. And so you should know that the event is being recorded by the ABC for subsequent broadcast both on ABC One television and on ABC Radio National. Some of you may be inclined to be tweeting during the course of tonight, so if you are, let me give you the hashtag. It's #IQ2OZ, IQ2Oz, and that's the one you can use and you'll be able to see how you trend. Now, there are some basic rules for this debate. You will have seen them outlined on the order paper provided. Some of them are just procedural, about the time that people are going to speak, but others are more important in terms of the spirit in which we undertake this contest of ideas. We are strongly encouraging our speakers here, and if you speak in the debate itself, to be passionate and committed in the views that you might express. But we also ask you to respect the intrinsic dignity of the people who are participating, whether they're on the stage or in the hall. It's about having respectful disagreement, even though that might be passionate in tone. Now, hopefully everybody, as you entered, was asked your opinion about the topic. Are you for, against or undecided? And if you were, then that will have been recorded. What you should have found on your seat when you came in is a ballot paper, and that will be cast later on when we have the formal vote. Those ballot papers are very simple to use. If you're for the motion, you put in the for side. If you're against, cast the against side. But if you're still undecided, and I hope that you won't be by the time you cast your ballot, then just leave the ballot paper joined together and cast it as a whole, and it'll be counted as still undecided. Now, the form of tonight's debate is as outlined in the order paper. The topic is that animals should be off the menu. And it's now my intention to introduce each of our speakers, and I'll introduce them as a bit of a job lot, all of the speakers for the affirmative and then all of the speakers for the negative. And after I've introduced them, each side, I'd ask you to welcome them then as a whole. The first speaker for the affirmative is Peter Singer, born in Melbourne, educated at the University of Melbourne and the University of Oxford. He's taught at the University of Oxford, La Trobe University and Monash University. Since 1999, he's been the Ira W. DeCamp Professor of Bioethics at the University Centre for Human Values at Princeton University. And from 2005, he's also held the part-time position of Laureate Professor at the University of Melbourne in the Centre for Applied Philosophy and Public Ethics. Peter first became well known internationally after the publication of Animal Liberation, that seminal work in 1975. Since then he's written many other books, including Practical Ethics, The Expanding Circle, How Are We to Live, The Ethics of What We Eat with Jim Mason, and most recently, The Life You Can Save. He's joined by the second speaker, Philip Wollen. He was formerly Vice President of Citibank, specialising in corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, and at the age of 34 was rated by Australian Business Magazine in their top 40 Australian headhunted executives. But at the age of 40, he witnessed cruelty on such a colossal scale that it affected him profoundly. He decided to give away everything he owned with warm hands and to die broke, and he says so far he's right on budget. Today he devotes his life to children, animals, the environment, the terminally ill, the homeless and the arts. He supports over 500 humanitarian projects in over 40 countries with schools, orphanages, shelters, sanctuaries, clinics and scholarships. And he's received the Order of Australia and in 2007 was Australian of the Year in Victoria. And finally, joining the team for the affirmative is Veronica Ridge, a senior editor at The Age, who's currently editing the Life and Style section of the Saturday Age. Previously, Veronica was editor of Epicure, The Age's weekly food and wine section, and in 2010 won the Best Food Journalist Award at Le Cordon Bleu World Food Media Awards for 3 articles published in Epicure on food ethics and the future of food. She's held several senior editing positions involving education, the arts, literature, entertainment, cultural and social trends, health and lifestyle and property. She's got an honours degree from RMIT University in literary journalism and studied philosophy, as I discovered during the chat before, although she struggled with some of the French philosophers, as we all do. A proud Melburnian, long after starting out as a cadet reporter, Veronica still gets a daily thrill from the publication of beautifully crafted words on newsprint and online pages. Please welcome them all. The team speaking against the motion will be led off by Fiona Chambers, a lecturer at Marcus Oldham Agricultural College in Geelong. She holds a Diploma of Applied Science in Agriculture, specialising in animal health, nutrition and genetics, and is undertaking a Master of Animal Breeding Management at Sydney University. Fiona has farmed organically at her Dalesford property since 1990 and began breeding Wessex saddleback pigs in 1995. She's a founding director of the Rare Breeds Trust of Australia and is a director of the Rare Breeds International World Board. She's delivered papers on the subject of sustainable farming and the conservation of farm animal genetic diversity at conferences both here and overseas. She's received a number of awards and fellowships in her 20-year farming career, most recently the 2011 Delicious Food Heritage Award and Best Bacon, the Foodie's Guide to Melbourne from 2010. She's been inducted into the Melbourne Food Hall of Fame. Bruce McGregor is an animal scientist of international standing in his fields of animal production science. His voluntary community environmental work has been acknowledged with a Centenary of Federation medal. Bruce works at Deakin University and is the author of over 450 research, technical and advisory publications and is an associate editor of the international journal Small Ruminant Research. His interest in geography, history, biodiversity have led him to visit many traditional animal production systems across the globe. Growing up in rural Victoria instilled in Bruce a love of nature and an addiction to Aussie rules football, a St Kilda supporter. He's been involved with many community environmental groups, but particularly environmental restoration and protection of the Merry Creek catchment in Melbourne. Bruce is a long-term supporter of Oxfam, Bush Heritage Australia and other philanthropic causes. And last but not least, Adrian Richardson, head chef at Melbourne's La Luna Bistro and a co-host of 10's Good Chef, Bad Chef television program. For many people, air travel and good food are mutually exclusive experiences. But for Richardson, it was one that led him to the other. I started working in kitchens, he says, part-time to pay for my lessons, and that's where it sort of kicked off. I gave up the flying lessons and went back to school. Since then, he's worked in some of the most prestigious kitchens around the world. Growing up in a household with a melange of North African, Middle Eastern and Italian cuisine, Richardson's heritage definitely helps explain his enthusiasm for quality food that's packed with flavour. What his heritage doesn't help explain is his interest in all things blood and guts, given one side of his family are in fact strict vegetarians. Nevertheless, when it comes to meat, Richardson wrote the book on it. Literally, it's called Meat, and it was released in 2008 and provided readers with a simplistic guide on how to buy, cook and enjoy meat. Please welcome the speakers for the negative. Ladies and gentlemen, the proposition before this House is that animals should be off the menu. I invite Peter Singer to address this House with his arguments for the affirmative.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to introduce this topic on behalf of the team that I'm leading. I think we will show you convincingly that animals should be off the menu. We'll do this by ranging through a number of different issues. Briefly, we'll speak about health. We'll speak about the best use of the food we produce. We'll speak about environmental questions. We'll speak, of course, about animal ethics. And we will also, particularly Veronica Ridge, will tell you that with animals off the menu, it doesn't mean that you can't have delicious food to eat. So that is essentially our case, and we are, to echo what Simon Longstaff just said, passionate and committed about this topic. So let me just briefly outline the reasons along these lines, and I will do it roughly in ascending order of importance. In other words, I'll leave the most important, which for me is the ethical argument, to the end. So firstly, health. Really all we need to argue, given the strength of the other points that we have to make, is that we can live a healthy life with animals off the menu. And I think the evidence for that conclusion is overwhelming. There are, of course, a lot of lifelong vegetarians, in fact second and third generation vegetarians, who are ample evidence of that. I'm not one of those myself. I've been a vegetarian for about 40 years, but I certainly find it a satisfactory, healthy diet. And there is now accumulating a lot of evidence that indeed the eating meat is likely to be bad for you. We're not here to say that any amount of whatever animal you might eat is necessarily going to shorten your life, but the evidence is accumulating. Just last week there was a new study published in the Archives of Internal Medicine, led by scientists at Harvard, one of the biggest studies, a study that has followed more than 100,000 people for an average of over 20 years, so a very difficult, time-consuming study to do. And the headline is particularly focused on red meat, that even small portions of red meat are likely to increase your chances of dying of a variety of causes, including cardiovascular disease and cancer. We've known for a long time that particularly bowel cancer or cancer of the colon and colorectal cancer are associated with red meat consumption. This study showed that it doesn't take a lot of red meat eating in order to increase your chances of dying of these diseases, and red meat consumption also increases your chances of getting diabetes. This was a carefully controlled study, and I think the evidence for that is now pretty conclusive. So there are a lot of other aspects of health which we don't have time to go into, but it does seem that in many respects people who do have animals off their menu are likely to live healthier and longer lives than those who have animals on their menu. Secondly, food use. We feed enormous amounts of grain and soybeans to animals, and in doing so we waste most of the food value of the grains that we're feeding them. Depending on the species, the animals may return to us somewhere between 1/10 and 1/3 of the food value of the grains and soybeans that we put into them. Some people worry about the use of grain for biofuel, that this is raising world food prices and making it harder for the poor to be able to afford the grains that they need to live on. But in fact, the amount of grain and soybeans that is fed to animals is something like 3 to 4 times as much as the grain that is converted to biofuel. So this is a huge problem. We're talking about something like 750 million tonnes of grain plus additional quantities of soybeans being fed to animals each year. You divide that up among the population of the world, it's really enough to feed the world's poor if only we could distribute it properly and get it to them. So we are just wasting vast quantities of food in order to produce the large quantities of animal products which are, generally speaking, at least partly grain-fed. Thirdly, the environmental question. We all know about factory farms which are locally polluting in many ways, producing enormous amounts of manure which are real problems and tend to pollute rivers and waterways. But we're now increasingly aware that animal production is a major factor in climate change. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization said it a few years ago in a report called Livestock's Long Shadow, that animal production, livestock production, is a bigger contributor to climate change than all of transport, all of the buses, trucks, trains and cars and aeroplanes. And in fact, I think that's an underestimate because it doesn't really include the full weight, the full damage that methane does to the environment. Standard studies say that methane is 25 times as damaging to climate change as carbon dioxide. That is if you take it over a century, because methane breaks down more quickly than carbon dioxide. But if you think that we really need to slow climate change, not just in the next century, but in the next 20 years, before we reach what Tim Flannery has called the tipping point, when it gets too late to prevent climate catastrophe, then methane over 20 years is 72 times as damaging to the environment as is carbon dioxide. And animals, particularly ruminant animals, produce large quantities of methane. And it doesn't help if they're on grass. Some people might think that if you have your cattle out on grass, they're not grain-fed, it's environmentally more friendly. Well, as far as climate change is concerned, sadly, and I say sadly because I do think it's a better life for the cattle, but sadly, it's actually worse. Per kilo of beef produced, cattle on grass produce at least 50% more methane than cattle fed grain, because they need more grass, and it's the digestion of the grass by the ruminant system that produces the methane, or digestion by the ruminant system, and it takes more grass, more digestion to produce a kilo of beef. So there is no way of having ecologically sustainable beef unless someone invents something that stops the cattle digestive system producing methane. Beef and other ruminants generally, but beef is certainly the worst offender, are contributing massively to climate change. Finally, let me come to the issue that started me a vegetarian more than 40 years ago. I don't think that we are justified in treating other sentient beings as things for us to use for our pleasure and convenience. And essentially, that is what we do in meat production. We take other sentient beings, we use them in ways that are convenient for us, of which, of course, the factory farm is the most egregious example, confining them, preventing them moving freely, just so that the meat gets a little bit cheaper. And I think that that is an abuse. I think that's a form of speciesism. That is, it's a prejudice against taking seriously the interests of beings that are not members of our species. We, I believe, are ethically obliged to give equal consideration to the interests of all sentient beings. Now, I don't say that that means they have equal rights with us. They obviously don't have the right to vote. They don't have the right to freedom of speech. That doesn't make sense. But given the interests that they have, interests in not feeling pain, interests in satisfying their basic instincts and desires, then I believe that we should give the same weight to them being able to live that kind of life as we would give to our own interests in living a decent life, and that is precisely what commercial meat production never can do. Thank you.
Fiona Chambers.
A mere 15 species currently account for over 90% of global livestock production. And of these, about 1/3 of cattle, pig, chicken and breeds already are extinct or currently at risk of extinction. To take these animals off the menu would move them from being at risk of extinction to being extinct. And extinction is forever. This would be an ecological and food security disaster. The irony is that in order to save these breeds and species, we do have to eat them, a paradox that exists because of symbiosis. That's an interaction that occurs when different organisms live in close proximity and association together, and typically to mutual advantage. So, for example, when a bee takes nectar from a flower, in payment for that, it transports pollen to other flowers to fertilise them. When an animal leaves a pile of dung on the ground, all the bugs come out from underneath and take that and use that pile of dung. Have we really come so far that we've forgotten the most basic laws of nature? I'm arguing tonight that animals should remain on the menu on an ecological basis, and I refute the statement that they should be off the menu. Indeed, the opposite is true. Animals are a fundamental part of agricultural biodiversity and must remain on the menu for two prime reasons. Firstly, animals are a vital link in the global ecology and as such are inextricably linked with the environment and the future of our food. And secondly, because they serve many important social, cultural, as well as biological functions. Animal welfare and sentience, however, are not, I believe, at the centre of this debate. Ecology is, and we ignore that at our peril. Far from being the ecological vandals they're made out to be, they fulfil a number of ecological services. They work in biologically diverse ecosystems that have evolved over thousands of years of evolution and domestication in partnership with humans. And at the heart of this relationship is the building of soil. Bacteria live in that soil. In a single gram of soil, there are billions of bacteria, and there are an estimated 60,000 species alone. Most of those are yet to be named, but what we do know is some of those bacteria are nitrogen lovers, and they take nitrogen from the air, from the atmosphere, and they make that available to plants. Nitrogen from the atmosphere that would otherwise be unavailable to plants or animals. Others are methane lovers, and the exclusive source of energy that they take is obtained by taking methane from the atmosphere. And it's research undertaken recently at Sydney University has shown that just 1 hectare of pasture has enough potential for these methane-loving bacteria to actually extract methane out of the environment that could be produced by 162 head of cattle. Now that's more than what you could run on a hectare. So it makes it methane neutral. Other research has shown that that's capable in much higher levels. It simply comes back to the management of our soil, the environment and the ecosystem, which includes the animals. What happens as well is you've got fungi in the soil that live at the roots, and those fungi transact and interact with the plants, providing they take carbon and they give the plants food and water. And this is where the animals come in. If you think about a tree has branches above the ground and roots below. With a plant, when the animals come along and graze that plant, they slough off the roots at the bottom, and that's what builds soil. The most simplistic arguments that I've heard to justify vegetarianism often compare the efficiency of just 1 hectare of land, comparing what animals can produce and what plants can produce. But this doesn't take into consideration the fact that you cannot crop year after year after year the same bit of ground. You take that same bit of ground and you put a pasture phase in, and animals form an intrinsic part of that rotation. We need to be farming for the future, for our children's future, for our children's children's future, not just for now. because we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we do borrow it from our children. The best way to achieve sustainability is through rotating and alternating arable paddocks between cropping and pastures. An animal phase incorporated into the cropping rotation can provide the perfect ecological balance. Managing the grazing systems by how often and for how long the animal grazes, mixing the species of animals that you use, sheep and cattle, for example. A skilled farmer works in harmony with the ecosystems so that the environment does truly stay in balance. This is not something that has to occur always on a small scale. This can happen on a large scale too. And we see examples in Australia where millions of hectares are run in exactly this way with low-impact grazing systems. So I disagree that animals cannot be raised in a humane and in an ecologically sustainable way. The environment has been created so that it can take up every bit of methane that these animals give off. In terms of the social and cultural functions of livestock, we see examples all over the world where people live in harmony with animals. Hmong people in China working in the terraced rice paddies in the northern part of Vietnam or southern part of China, without the buffaloes that they live with to plough these terraced steep terraces for their rice, without the pigs that they eat to support them in these high remote villages, without ducks and fish to eat the bugs, the mosquito larvae that exist in the rice paddies. Without all of these things, these people would not exist and work the land as they do. They would not then capture the rainfall in these mountainous areas and stop the erosion. That rainfall would go downstream and cause erosion, and the fertile deltas downstream would not be able to grow food for their populations. Ecological farming is the key. In 1543, Copernicus first suggested that the Earth revolved around the Sun and not the Sun around the Earth. It took 70 years for Galileo to support these same views, and he was tried for heresy by the Inquisition, sentenced to spend the rest of his life under house arrest because this view questioned the strongly held beliefs about the dominant position of humans and the supremacy of God. It only took 400 years to the Vatican to issue a formal apology to Galileo, so we now know that the Earth does in fact revolve around the Sun. But we don't have 4 years to get this right. Animal welfare and animal sentience are important. They're important just as the Earth and the Sun are important, but they are not the central issue. Without diminishing at all the importance of this, the highest animal welfare standards alone do not guarantee us ecologically sustainable farming system, and this must be our highest priority because our future food security depends on it. FAO supports this view and has stated the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for food and agriculture play a critical role in the fight against hunger by ensuring environmental sustainability while increasing food and agricultural production. Thank you.
Philip Wollen.
King Lear, late at night on the cliffs, asks the blind Earl of Gloucester, "How do you see the world?" And the blind man Gloucester replies, "I see it feelingly. And shouldn't we all? Animals must be off the menu because tonight they are screaming in terror in the slaughterhouses, in crates and in cages, vile, ignoble gulags of despair." You see, I heard the screams of my dying father as his body was ravaged by the cancer that killed him. And I realized I'd heard those screams before. In the slaughterhouse, their eyes stabbed out and their tendons slashed, on the cattle ships to the Middle East, and the dying mother wail as a harpoon explodes in her brain as she calls out to her calf. Their cries were the cries of my father. And I discovered that when we suffer as equals. And in their capacity to suffer, a dog is a pig, is a bear, is a boy. Meat today is the new asbestos, more murderous than tobacco. CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide from the livestock industry are killing our oceans with acidic, hypoxic dead zones. 90% of small fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows today are the world's largest ocean predators. The oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Billions of bouncy little chicks are ground up alive simply because they are male. Only 100 billion people have ever lived. 7 billion people live today. And yet we torture and kill 2 billion sentient living beings every week. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one. And we're now facing the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call them a virus. It is a crime against humanity of unimaginable proportions. But happily, the world is changing. 10 years ago, Twitter was a bird sound. www was a stuck keyboard. Cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking space. Google was a baby's burp. Skype was a typo. And Al-Qaeda was my plumber. Victor Hugo said, "There is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come." Well, animal rights today is now the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. Do you know there are over 600 million vegetarians in this world? And that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all put together. If we were one nation, we would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. Can you believe that? And despite this massive demographic footprint, we are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and killing cartels who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a question. Meat kills animals, kills us, and is killing our economies. Medicare has already bankrupted the United States. They will need $8 trillion invested in Treasury bills just to pay the interest, and they have precisely zero. They could shut down every school, Army, Navy, Air Force, Homeland Security, Marines, CIA, and FBI, and they still will not have the money to pay their doctor bills. And our Cornell and Harvard say that the optimum amount of meat in a healthy human diet is precisely zero. Water, as you know, is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war for it. Underground aquifers that took millions of years to fill are now running dry. It takes 50,000 liters of precious drinking water to make 1 kilo of beef. Today, 1 billion people are hungry. 20 million people will die from malnutrition. Cutting meat by only 10% will feed 100 million people, and eliminating meat will end starvation forever. If everyone ate a Western diet, we would need 2 planet Earths to feed us. We've only got one, and she is dying. Greenhouse gas emissions from livestock is 50% greater than transport, as Peter said. Cars, trains, buses, ships, lorries, the whole lot. And as I travel around the world, I see poor countries who sell their grain to the West while their own children starve in their arms. And the West feeds it to livestock so we can eat a steak? Am I the only one who sees this as a crime? Believe me, every morsel of meat we eat is slapping the tear-stained face of a hungry child. When I look into her eyes, do I remain silent? The earth can produce enough food for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. We are facing the perfect storm. If any nation had developed weapons that could wreak such havoc on the planet, we would launch a preemptive military strike and bomb it back into the Bronze Age. But it's not a rogue state, it's an industry. The good news is we don't have to bomb it. We can just stop buying it. Sir George Bush was wrong. The axis of evil does not run through Iraq, Iran, or North Korea. It runs through our dining tables. Weapons of mass destruction are our knives and forks. Our proposition is the Swiss Army knife of the future. It solves our environmental, water, human health problems and ends cruelty forever. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. This cruel, disgusting industry will end because we run out of excuses. Meat is like the 1 and 2 cent coins. It costs more to make than it's worth. And I come from the bush. Farmers are the ones with the most to gain. Farming won't end, it would boom. Only the product line will change. Farmers would make so much money they won't even bother counting it, and I'd be the first to applaud them. Governments would love us. New industries would emerge and flourish. Health insurance premiums would plummet. Hospital waiting lists would disappear. Hell, we'd be so healthy, we'd have to shoot someone just to start a cemetery. So tonight I have 2 challenges for the opposition. 2 challenges. Meat causes a wide range of cancers and heart disease. Would they name one disease caused by a vegetarian diet? And 2, I'm funding the Earthlings trilogy. If the opposition is so sure of their ground, I challenge them to send a copy of the Earthlings DVD to all their colleagues and all their customers. Go on, I dare you. Animals are not just other species, they are other nations, and we murder them at our peril. The peace map is drawn on a menu. Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Justice must be blind to race, color, religion, or species. If she's not blind, she will be a weapon of terror. And tonight, there is unimaginable terror in those ghastly Guantanamos we call factory farms or slaughterhouses. Believe me, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we wouldn't be having this debate tonight. You see, I believe another world is possible. And on a quiet night, I can hear her breathing. Let's get animals off the menu and out of these torture chambers. Please vote tonight for those who have no voice. Thank you.
Bruce McGregor.
Well, I'm on a hiding to nothing, aren't I? But being a St Kilda supporter doesn't really matter. There are 2 main points that I shall put against the proposition that animals should be off the menu. And these relate to human society and ecological sustainability. It's easy for us all to go and visit places where there are people who have animals on the menu, and if you're in any doubt, just pick up a Wheeler production called the Lonely Planet Guides. And in the Lonely Planet Guides you'll find directions to find Mongolian pastoralists who milk goats and horses, people in the Andes who use llamas to carry their goods, Tajik women who cook bread on fires fueled by dung, and Japanese and Chinese fishers who use cormorants to catch their fish to feed their families every day. Arguing that animals should be off the menu threatens the food security and livelihood of at least 2 billion people. In relation to human societies, there are 3 points which I wish to make. Firstly, taking animals from the menu will actually remove a vast amount of not only meat, but also milk and milk products such as yogurt and cheese, often essential items in the diets of vegetarians. You may ask, how is this possible when the animals don't have to be killed to produce meat? You need to remember an important thing. Half of the progeny are male, which do not produce any milk. And for efficient milk production systems, most males are grown to a suitable size and sold or used for meat, and only a very few are kept for breeding. The problem is that if you keep all the males and unproductive females, you'll have a huge waste of feed resources, and over time there'll be a steadily declining production of milk or whatever the product you're concerned is per area of land or feed resources. The second issue is that the affirmative position implies that many humanitarian organisations are misguided and morally wrong, and so clearly are the people who support them. Organisations such as the Australian-based Oxfam and the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organisation have advocated for years that to improve human welfare, we need to improve animal farming practices across the developing world. For example, the US-based Heifer Project International has run their Women in Livestock Development program for more than 20 years. Why have they done this? They've done it because women told them that they wanted healthy children in a healthy environment. They were sick of living in places covered in dust storms. Women told them that they wanted animals. And to do this, the Wild Women program provides them with animals and training. The women build up their herds and provide milk and meat for their children, and they generate income by selling their surplus. Without the use of animals for meat, there would be many more people trapped in poverty, and I'll explain that further as we go. The third point is that animals are also very important in many traditional economies as they are used as a bank and represent people's families' wealth and inheritance. This is underwritten by the value of the animal as meat. Livestock such as chickens, rabbits and goats are sold when these people need cash for cash transactions. Thus, if all markets were removed for meat by the stroke of the affirmative team's pen, food production will decline, food prices will increase, and 2 billion people will head towards starvation, probably losing their life savings and inheritance. Does the affirmative team really think these people are morally wrong? Have they considered all the implications for a large slice of the world's population by taking animals off the menu? I don't think so. So I've purchased a small gift from Oxfam to remind them of these issues. They include a card about chickens, duck and goat. The goat card says it's gruff, tough and does heaps of good stuff. Now, the relevance of that is related to the 3 ecological points I wish to make. Firstly, animals produce a lot of nutritious food from materials that humans cannot eat. Animals do this in a range of harsh environments such as mountains, deserts, tropical forests and drought-prone savanna, places where people live. Grazing animals convert vegetation of absolutely no nutritional value to people into high-protein meat. Animals produce food where crops don't. They also convert a whole lot of material that's unaccepted to humans, such as crop residues, byproducts of processing, and unmarketable quantities of vegetables, fruits and cereals. Similarly, fish, eels and other aquatic animals convert water-based foods into high-value meat for humans. There are many systems where various wastes and products are fed into ponds, thus feeding fish to provide food for humans and animals. Only 38% of the world's land surface is agricultural land, including 11% that's arable, used for crops, and about 2% for permanent crops like orchards. Is it the affirmative position that we should cease producing food from the other 25% of land which can support animals but not crops? Is this true? The second ecological issue is that the natural surplus in many natural populations can be sustainably harvested for human food. Humans usually overlook the fact that natural losses occur in every ecosystem, because without natural losses, each ecosystem would become overstocked with ageing and diseased animals. Depending on the system, a half or more of each generation is naturally lost to disease and predation. Thus, in a well-managed system, natural losses can be harvested for meat. Obviously, this is only acceptable if the ecosystems are managed carefully and sustainably. I'm not here to advocate harvesting of endangered species or the exploitation of threatened ecosystems, but there is evidence that farming of endangered species can help with their survival. An example comes from North America, where native North Americans had complex cultures related to the migration of American bison. They had cultural limitations on the harvesting of the meat. Unfortunately, the American bison almost became extinct courtesy of the land wars that were waged against native North Americans. By the early last century, there were only a few thousand bison left, but they were saved in large part because of the number of farm bison, which increased rapidly. And in recent decades, bison have been used for meat and are now helping to restore degraded prairies. The critical issue with harvesting natural ecosystems is that too many species are not sustainably harvested. This is not evidence that animals should be off the menu. It is evidence that there is a need for more biological research into the productivity and resources available for these food stocks, and there's need for greater government oversight and enforcement of regulations. Every time you hear people say that we want less tax, that means less oversight and less enforcement. The third ecological issue is the environmental problems with cropping. Irrigated agriculture, for example, requires the extensive damming of rivers, disruption of ecosystems and degradation of land, including erosion, nutrient depletion, salt incursion and exotic weeds. All of these things are associated with cropping and land clearing. The alternative to cropping are systems of mixed enterprise agriculture, which Fiona referred to, where animals help to break disease cycles in crop systems. The effects of climate change over the next 40 years is predicted to reduce crop yields between 10 and 20% through the tropics and subtropics, and increase the amount of marginal land for cropping. There will be little alternative to the people who live there but to use this marginal cropping land for sustainable animal production. There is much to learn about these systems. The profession I belong to aims to improve the husbandry of animals and the management of production systems. Research is making these industries better. However, the investment into scientific research on a global scale is declining every year. Without appropriate investment, there will be little further development. Thank you very much.
Veronica Ridge.
Last month, at a sleek food and design event in Milan, the world's top chef René Redzepi from Denmark excitedly unveiled his newest Epicurean discovery. It was simple enough. An innocuous-looking pine frond gleaned from the forests of Scandinavia, apparently with a citrus tang to die for. René enthused, the flavour is like thousands of grapefruits. He told those gathered at the chef-in called Identità Milano, we did high fives for a day in the kitchen when we found that. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should all follow a diet of Danish pine fronds, juniper berries and mosses and lichens that Redzepi forages from the forest floor. And yes, Redzepi also serves meat, some of it on the extreme side. There's poached deer, whale penis, and you can choose to devour a live wriggling shrimp in brown butter if you so desire. The point I'm making is that at the world's top restaurant today, you can have a wonderfully entertaining, inventive and delicious meal made for you without slaughter. There has been a revolution in vegetarian and vegan cooking and eating in the past decade. A new generation of cooks are using vegetables, spices, nuts, seeds, herbs and all kinds of other seeds and nuts in incredible ways. Gone are the mung beans and bland wholemeal pies that accompanied the whiff of 1970s hippiedom. In fact, much of the pleasure and excitement in eating today is this new wave of vegetarian and vegan food that follows an ingredient-led locavore agenda. Let me share a dish with you from a distinguished European vegetarian restaurant, the Café Paradiso in Cork, Ireland. Its description: creamy feta, pistachio and couscous cakes with sweet and hot pepper jam, citrus greens, coriander yoghurt and spiced chickpeas. Vegetarian degustations you can get here at Jacques Raymond, Vue de Monde, the Royal Mail at Dunkeld, at the Lake House at Dalesford are among the finest that you will find anywhere. Jacques Raymond's latest vegetarian degustation menu has 9 courses that build in texture, richness, flavour and drama as each is served. The final savoury dish in the lineup is a warm terrine created using lightly steamed Nicola potatoes, layered with aged Comté cheese and then seared to a golden crispness top and bottom. It's paired with crunchy tempura enoki mushrooms, a clean green sage and nettle puree, sharp poached nectarine for contrast, and there's a lovely hit of wasabi from granules that are a bit like sand, using a molecular gastronomy cooking technique. No amount of beef, lamb, chicken or fish could improve these meals. The same goes for vegetarian and vegan food from Melbourne's ethnic cuisines: Indian, Lebanese, Japanese, Mexican, all cultures that celebrate delicious and healthy animal protein-free dishes, and they have shown us how to do it. Recipes. The most innovative vegetarian recipes today are from the food writer Yotam Ottolenghi, who pens a column in The Guardian called New Vegetarian. Ottolenghi sets out, he says, to create fireworks with vegetables using noisy ingredients: lemon, pomegranate, garlic, chilli. A little tip for a Sunday brunch is green pancakes, lime butter and a couple of glasses of Prosecco. Google his recipes, you'll be amazed. Meat alternatives. New York Times columnist Mark Bittman recently did a blind taste test comparing chicken and fake chicken made from plants. He couldn't tell the difference, using the criteria taste, texture and chewiness. Bittman wrote, "Would I rather eat cruelly raised, polluting, unhealthful chicken, or a plant product that's nutritionally similar or superior, good enough to fool me and requires no antibiotics, cutting off of heads and other nasty things?" Whole Foods in the United States will be selling it soon at a price cheaper than the chicken that made it on the supermarket shelf after a miserable 6-week existence. These people are showing us the way forward. In 2012, you can be a happily satisfied Epicurean and have ethics. There's even a word for it, an Ethicurian. History's great thinkers who advocated a vegetarian diet are too long to list here, but their theories covered religious, spiritual, philosophical, social, health, environmental themes. But one of the most moving arguments was put forward by 18th century English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who said the question regarding animals is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? While animals can't speak in ways we comprehend and their intellect is lacking, they are entitled to be treated with care because, like us, they feel pain. The fact that they can't put their suffering into words is no excuse for ignoring it. In fact, it puts a higher responsibility on we supposedly enlightened humans to identify their screams and help them. And of course, the modern landmark book raising awareness of animal rights, especially farm animals, Peter Singer's Animal Liberation in 1975. All these advanced thinkers, and yet the plight of animals for food hasn't improved much. Food production methods in the Western world, used since the 1950s, driven by a demand for ever cheaper food, are not only damaging our health and the environment, they have led to the inhumane, intensive farming of animals. Bruce and Fiona have mentioned the Mongolians and Chinese who do use meat in their daily lives. But in fact, we are defending that animals should be off the menu here. We have the choices. Some people don't. And too many people nowadays have been lulled into a sense of complacency by the thought that animals are slaughtered humanely, presumably then, therefore, removing any possible humanitarian objection to the eating of meat. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the facts, as we have all seen in recent shocking footage, including an Australian abattoir. There is no such thing as humane slaughter, and there is a glaring double standard between the way we treat our pets with care and respect and not the animals we eat. Melbourne University academic Siobhan O'Sullivan argues in a new book that the key to understanding this is out of sight, out of mind. The more visible an animal is within the community, the more likely we are to treat it with kindness and respect. O'Sullivan points out that animal welfare laws for hens in petting zoos that teach children about caring for animals are more comprehensive than laws for broiler hens raised for meat. It's hypocrisy that most parents have had to consider. Sadly, lab and meat animals are out of the public view, and industrialised agriculture perpetuates concealment at almost every level of production. I conclude that the avoidance of pain and suffering of any living being should be the main consideration when making culinary choices. This is the number one imperative for all human beings and should be the guiding premise when choosing what to eat. I don't see an argument to counter this on the basis that you can eat brilliantly without slaughtering animals. Thank you.
Adrian Richardson.
Thank you very much. I love meat. I love cooking meat, I love eating meat, and I love serving meat to other people. If it's got a pulse, I can cook it. And there are plenty of people here tonight that have eaten my moist, juicy, tender beef. If you haven't, you could always pop down to my restaurant, La Luna Bistro. Just tell them Adrian sent you. Well, we did an audience survey earlier on tonight, and the results showed that 78% of the people here tonight have eaten meat in the last 6 months. So I think that I can speak for the majority of people here that it'll be over our cold, dead bodies if you take meat or animals off the menu. It would be un-Australian. We, of course, are the country that invented the BYO meat barbecue. We are meat eaters, carnivores. We are so close to our mammoth hunting, savage ancestors that it's not funny. It's in our nature, it's natural. Imagine the days of roasting wild boar over hot coals underneath the stars. That was us, people. And if you have any doubt as to how close we are to our ancestors, you just have to go to any AFL website. Just click on any link. Collingwood's got a good one. Now for the other 22%, the vegetarians, the non-meat eaters, and their friends, the vegans. I can see you almost bracing yourself, thinking I'm going to take a swipe. Well, that's not happening tonight. I have a confession to make in front of all of you. I'm actually half vegetarian. Well, half of my family are vegetarian, Dad's side. My grandparents, Peter and Kathleen Richardson, brought my father and 9 of his siblings up to be staunch vegetarians. They believed that life is sacred. And I agree. I think that vegetarianism and the act of not eating the flesh of another beast is a most noble cause. They made that choice, they believed in that choice, and for that I have always had a great deal of respect for them. But it all comes down to choice. If you don't eat meat, great, bully to you. But if you do eat meat, which most of the world's population do, it's how you choose that meat. That's important, and that's what this debate should be about. Now, I'll just clarify my half-vegetarian bit. For the first 2.5 years, I was a vegetarian. That was Dad's choice. I didn't eat any meat. But that all ended one Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on my grandmother's knee, my nonna, my Italian part of the family. They ate meat, and a chicken wing magically appeared. I suspect a little foul play was at hand. But that chicken wing was devoured. It was devoured so much that the bones crumbled in my hands. And you know what? I made the choice from then on. I would eat meat, I would enjoy meat, and I would have respect for the meat. But a month later, my dad, the vegetarian, he was seduced by the same cunning beast. A whole roast chicken stuffed with rice, lemon and parsley, and a little garlic butter pushed underneath the skin of the breast to baste the chicken from the inside as it cooks. Now that's a little tip for you next time you cook a chook. Now I've heard much talk this evening about how eating meat is unhealthy. It will cause you cancer and kill you, from experts who's talking statistics and studies. We all know how well statistics and studies can be manipulated. Just watch an episode of Today Tonight. I can only talk about my own personal experiences. My grandparents, my dad's parents, the vegetarians, ate very well. They grew their own fruit and vegetables, baked bread and cooked and ate the most amazing vegetarian food. They ate a balanced diet, a very healthy diet. They lived into their 90s, healthy and very happy. And my grandmother, she'll be watching this later, she's alive and well today at 92. My mother's grandparents, the Italian side, the Ferrays, they ate meat. They ate pasta, beans, fruit and vegetables, much of it grown in their backyard as well. What they ate was just as healthy as the vegetarians. They cooked and served me the most amazing Mediterranean food, and they both lived happily and healthy into their 90s. So to hear the argument that eating red meat will kill you just doesn't wash with me. I think it's a load of baloney. I think it's information manipulation. You know what kills you? Eating too much meat kills you. Too many chips, donuts, hot dogs, pies, all of the processed crap that's offered to us today, and even more so our kids. That's the stuff that will kill you. We need to eat a balanced diet, and a balanced diet means that meat doesn't have to be eaten at every meal. Just by having a few meat-free days and eating lots of green vegetables is a fantastic start. And by doing only these two things, we can have a huge impact on the planet and our bodies. I have to also include this for the ladies and my wife. Chocolate is also part of a balanced diet. As far as I'm concerned, if you eat a healthy, balanced diet, there is no health reason for not eating meat. And it's up to us to teach our kids. Sit down, eat together as a family, talk to each other. Take the time to set a good example to your kids. And this starts by turning the television off. If you want to stop factory farming, don't buy supermarket meat. There goes my endorsement deal. And stay out of fast food stores. Go to your local butcher. Remember them? I'm sure there's a few ladies here that do. Your local butcher will listen to you. Tell him, I want Victorian grass-fed beef, free-range pork from Fiona, free-range chicken, and Australian lamb. We know what the Kiwis do to theirs. Believe me, a happy animal tastes so much better. And I know because that's what I use at home and in my restaurant. La Luna Bistro, if you didn't get it before. Buy Fiona's pork. We know her pigs are cared for from birth up until that last second. And I think if an animal has lived a good life wandering the fields, eating green grass and nibbling on daisies and drinking streams in the sunshine, as long as the death is fast and painless. I don't have a problem with killing animals. It's a natural thing to me, and I've killed a few. Fiona's pigs have all good days and only one bad day. And believe me, Fiona's pigs are delicious. If you make the choice and put the money into the hands of the farmers, growers and sellers that are doing the right thing, eventually we will see change. Last night I was watching television and a KFC commercial came on. They're using free-range chicken. They're listening to us. Another thing that concerns me are meat eaters that don't want to acknowledge the fact that the filet mignon they're tucking into, that's so juicy and tender, was once a living thing and needs to be respected. They're the ones that should be eating the tofu turkey, the soy sausages and all those other fake meat products. We know eating meat has an impact on the environment. Everything we do has an impact. So if we're eating less meat and using humanely reared, sustainably produced meat, and the queasy meat eaters have switched to their fun bacon, don't you think that we're doing our bit to reducing the negative impact? For anyone to tell me that animals should be off the menu, I think is ridiculous. I think if we make the right choice, and that's what this whole debate comes down to, don't you think we can all enjoy a tender, juicy, grass-fed steak every now and again? Remember one thing, and this is the thing I want you to go home with tonight. Eat meat responsibly. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the arguments from our 6 speakers, and in a little while you'll be able to cast your vote. But before you do, there's an opportunity now for people in the audience themselves to contribute to the debate. So what I'd like to do, if we bring the lights up a little bit, there are microphones just here, here and up the back. And what I'd like to do is provide anybody who wants to speak for the motion or against the motion up to a minute to do so. Perhaps make your way to the microphone if you'd like to have a go at influencing the audience and how it's going to vote. Before I do though, Philip, you issued a challenge to the other side, and I don't think they heard it because you had a bit of a frog in your throat at the time. So do you just want to repeat what that challenge was?
There were 2 challenges. The first one, we know, well, everyone except the opposition knows of the cancers and heart diseases caused by meat. Let's accept that. Now, I wanted them to tell me one disease that they can identify that is caused by a vegetarian diet, and 2, if they are so confident about their position, about what actually happens on these animal factories, would they be prepared to, because I'm funding the Earthlings Trinity, would they be prepared to give a copy of this DVD to all their friends, family, and most importantly, their customers?
What's it called?
And I'll pay for it.
What is it?
It's called Earthlings.
Earthlings, right.
And by the way, you can Google it if you like.
Okay, so if anybody wanted, and we'll come back to you in a moment, I won't get you to respond just now, but if you believe that the factory farming process is defensible, and I'm not sure that you've argued that, then would you give Earthling to others? Okay, let's get to the audience. Now, we'll take it in order of for and against so that there's an equal chance, and I'll start over this side first. So is there anybody there who would like to speak for the motion? Yes, if you do, if you could just give me your name, and then you've got for a minute and you'll get the bell like everybody else. So away you go.
Great. My name's Matthew. I just was interested in hearing about the soil carbon stuff. My understanding is that the University of Sydney research was underway, but there's no peer-reviewed scientific outcome. So in other words, that research that someone was doing into trying to get carbon into soils to try and offset the methane production, which is terrible, from the belching of cows and sheep, and therefore agriculture is by far the biggest vector of emissions once you take into account the fact that we currently under-account on the multiplier effect for methane in the atmosphere. So in fact, methane should really be calculated on a 105 times basis, not a 25 times basis, and that's the latest NASA data for the effect of methane. So my understanding, and Fiona, if you can quote which peer-reviewed journal that's come out in, because I believe it hasn't, and I looked into this about a week or 2 ago, you'll find that although someone claims they're doing some tests, they haven't got it published, and so it hasn't been agreed with by the scientific community more broadly.
Okay, opportunity, Fiona, for you to respond. Have you seen a peer-reviewed journal article?
Great comment, and no, I can't answer that at the moment, and I'm more than happy to go away and look into it for you. I think what is clearly known is that these bacteria do take out methane, and that's where the research needs to be. Further research into that to look at how they can take that up, because we're looking at a cycle. So it's how we can maximise those in the soil.
So the short answer is no, not no. Somebody wants to speak against the motion.
My name's Wei. I happen to be a doctor, and I'd like to make some comments about Mr. Wollen's challenge about the health effects of a vegetarian diet. Now, I would like to comment that there has been some research that shows that vegetarians do lead healthier lives than meat eaters, but unfortunately, a lot of the meat eaters in those studies are those who eat, steaks and hot dogs and chips and hamburgers every day. What hasn't been adequately studied are people who eat a balanced, healthy diet with small, medically recommended amounts of meat. He wanted me to mention a number of diseases that can be caused by a vegetarian diet. Now, I do agree that a balanced vegetarian diet can result in very good health, but unfortunately it's not always easy to get it right, and a significant number of people do get it wrong. I think in Western society, a vegetarian diet does lead to the increased risk of deficiencies of calcium and iron, which can impair brain development. In the third world, it's almost a death sentence. I'd like to mention that Mr. Wollen mentions cancers and cardiovascular disease especially. Now, nearly everything causes cancer, but one of the most studied and most infamous carcinogens is aflatoxin from plants.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I'll now take somebody who wants to speak.
Can I just comment?
Yeah,
I just wonder whether Dr. Wei has actually seen the Archives of Internal Medicine study that was published a week or so ago, because it is controlling for the variables you've mentioned. It's controlling for other things like the amount of fat eaten, whether people are eating chips. It's also, relating to what Adrian said, it is both unprocessed and processed red meat. It's not only. So I do think there is evidence that even modest amounts of red meat contribute to an increased mortality from these diseases.
I have a fantastic mind for trivia, and I remember learning at school that if you eat 20 kilograms of onions, you'll get sickle cell anemia. And that will be the least of your problems. Right, I'll come back. Down here, somebody wants to speak for the motion.
And Adrian, you said that eating meat is a natural thing. We've evolved to do it. But I want to know what is natural about drinking another animal's breast milk, scalding chickens alive to defeather them, force-feeding ducks with tubes down their throats so that we can enjoy foie gras, and systematically separating male and female calves so that one can be slaughtered for veal and the other for breeding, and what is natural about keeping hundreds and thousands of animals cooped up in cages in which they cannot stand up, they cannot turn around, and they can barely move.
Right. Adrian.
Well, what you pull out is the worst stuff that's going on in the meat industry. I don't use foie gras, I never have and never will. I use free-range chickens. That's what I like. Now, it's about doing the right thing, and I don't think. I mean, you pull out all this emotive language, and it's wrong. Some of this stuff, and if you're worried about veal and geez, it's horrible to we shouldn't be eating veal and we shouldn't be killing baby cows. Don't eat milk and cheese. Take it off your menu. You're the ones that can control this. That's what it's all about. If you don't want to eat these things, don't buy them, and the people who are providing it will stop doing it. They'll start growing soybeans or whatever else you choose.
Okay. Is there somebody down here who would like to speak against the motion? Yes, you come forward then, you take priority.
Thank you. My name's Michael O'Neill. I actually raise rare breed cattle in a very ethical manner, so much so that Fiona Chambers actually sells them through her farm shop. My question is for the four team. The third speaker highlighted a number of dishes that leading chefs here and internationally all serve, and held them up as a paragon of vegetarianism, over half of them contain dairy products. One of the principal arguments with the 14 is the cruelty aspect and the ethics of meat production. The dairy industry is possibly one of the most unethical industries. How can they advocate dishes or that we should eat dairy product when dairy products come from milk? Milk can only be produced when a female lactates. For a female to lactate, it has to conceive and deliver a live birth. What happens in the dairy industry is that the progeny is taken from the mother so that the mother can produce obscene amounts of milk.
I think we've got the point, so thank you very much for that. Now, if there's anybody from the dairy industry, you can have a say in a moment. Who wants... This was really directed to you, wasn't it, about your dairy included recipes?
We don't agree with using dairy products either. I could have given you a vegan example for every example I gave you there. We were looking at, my argument was the slaughter of animals and the inhumane treatment of animals. If there'd been more time, I would certainly have gone into the mistreatment of animals in the milk industry and the dairy industry, and I could have given you 1,000 recipes that any of these restaurants would have served.
Are you arguing against dairy with the same vehemence as you would against the meat industry?
Yes, I am.
Right, okay. Somebody who wants to speak for the motion from up the back. Is there anybody up there that's waiting to speak?
I've just got a couple of points that I want to address from the side speaking against. The first one is that I felt like the actual moral issue of the sentience of the animals themselves wasn't really addressed by the side speaking against, and when it was the last speaker, sorry, I forgot your name. You mentioned that if you do see the moral issues of eating sentient beings, then eat less meat. But for me, that's on the same spectrum as not eating meat at all. It's just probably taking less action. Another issue that I found with your arguments was one of you mentioned human superiority and certain thinkers having different ideas on the kind of speciesist view that humans have had throughout history. I found that kind of ironic, considering I think that's the debate that we're having right now, is, you know, how important we are as opposed to the rest of the other beings that we live on Earth with. And I feel as though the bringing up certain cultures in other countries is kind of a form of cultural relativism, where you kind of remove yourself from the moral dilemma and excuse it because it is a different culture.
Okay, thank you. Just hold that. We'll come back to you in a bit later. We'll get a few more people. Somebody who wants to speak against the motion? Yes, down here. And then we'll take one for the motion from over there. Yep.
Hi. Just putting aside sort of the actual consumption of meat once it's... or the consumption of animals after they've been slaughtered. If it's no longer an economical situation where we are eating meat, then what do you actually imagine happening to those animals? Would they, I mean, what is the ethical argument behind that?
So it's really, what's the alternative for animals if they're not going to be eaten in the world of this thing? Again, hold that, we'll come back to that. And a speaker for the motion down here.
Yep, I have a question directed at, is it Bruce in the middle?
Bruce?
Hi. All right, Bruce, I'm a Yank, and I was delighted when you mentioned one of my favorite species of animal, which was the great American bison. And I think you'd be interested to know that it wasn't that the great American bison was driven down to a few thousand in number. They were driven down to 27 in a number. And the reason that the great American bison were driven near extinction was because of the cattle industry. And the reason that Native Americans were driven off their land was to make room for the cattle industry. And to this day, the Montana Department of Livestock, and I grew up in West Yellowstone, Montana, continues to slaughter great American bison for the very reason that the cattle industry and the meat industry is afraid that they're going to compete with their cattle over grazing lands. I'm very concerned about biodiversity. Phil Wollen and Peter Singer brought up the very good point that we're facing this great mass extinction, and when the greatest threats to species surviving is ocean pollution, global warming, and deforestation, and the meat industry is the largest factor in all three of those things, I wonder how meat is good for biodiversity.
Thank you. Yeah. So let's start off with animal sentience, Fiona, which I know you wanted to say something about.
I was going to firstly respond to the speciesism side of things, because why limit it to a sentient being if we're not going to be speciesist? My point was that bacteria and fungi are by far the biggest determinants for us going forward, and we're just completely ignoring them because we're so human-centric and so sentient being-centric. That was my argument.
Right, okay, well that's something. Now, do you want to say anything else about sentience? Anybody? Yes, Bruce.
A comment about this, because if people need to eat something to live, and we're making a choice between eating live plants and other things. So the argument that's been put to you is that we shouldn't eat sentient animals, but we're allowed to eat plants, which are living things. So you need to really get your ethics clear here about what you are doing as a biological organism, which actually you depend on bacteria in your gut actually to digest most of your food anyway. So you're going through a different process altogether. So we need to be clear what the questions are. And the question that we were asked to debate was that animals should be off the menu, not for us, off all the menus. It doesn't say off our menu or you know, Peter Singer's menu. It says off the menu.
Thank you. Now, let's go to a couple of things that were put. One question was about, coming from the floor, Philip, which I think you wanted to answer, was in relation to how should the animals that are no longer going to be eaten, how are they to live? And then I want to, perhaps Peter wants to come in. Let's take this as a serious question about whether or not one's ethical concerns should extend beyond those of other sentient beings to other forms of life, other orders of being. How should we think about that? So, Philip, you have a crack at the first one.
You ask, what are we going to do with the animals that we've already got sitting on Earth with us right now? Those animals came into being because their parents were artificially inseminated. They were produced in a factory, an animal factory. All we got to do is turn off the factory. What about just talking about the dairy industry? How did the cows were actually artificially inseminated? So that's a big piece of it. In fact, of the 70 billion animals that are killed according to the FAO every year, 50 billion of them are poultry. And
So let's assume, however they come into existence, yes, the cages are thrown open, the pastures are made free range, and the animals wander the world. What happens to them?
They're not going to overrun us. You know, let's face that.
How will they fare?
I'll cut you a bit of slack. I'll let you eat all the animals that are already sitting in the factory farms. Just stop producing any more, okay?
Okay. And Peter, the question about other orders of being, why those with sentience being given privilege?
I think the fundamental principle here is, as I said, one of equal consideration of interests. Now, I think to have interests, you have to have experiences of some sort. We have interests in not feeling pain and in enjoying our lives, and so do non-human animals generally, certainly birds and mammals, I would say all vertebrates. I'm not going to go to the wall saying that an oyster is capable of feeling pain, and if somebody wants to say, well, I'm going to leave oysters on my menu, I'm not really going to argue against that. And certainly I don't think that bacteria are sentient beings, and so I don't think that they have interests. So giving equal consideration, you can give equal consideration to oysters and bacteria if you like, but if I'm right in saying that bacteria anyway have no experiences, are not conscious, then it's just giving equal consideration to no interest at all. So it's like when you try to multiply 12 by 0, you still get 0. So I think it's the same sort of thing. If there are no interests there, I don't think that thinking ethically about them for their own sake really makes sense. Of course, they may play a role in the natural ecosystems and they may be instrumentally useful, but I don't think their interests or they can't at the foundation of ethics in the way that sentient beings do.
Okay, let's take a few more comments from the floor. Yep, please. Speaking for the motion.
My name is Kaylee and I wanted to begin by thanking all the speakers for their contributions this evening. I've got more of an observation really, and it's been touched upon briefly already, so I'll try and be quick. I just wanted to say that the fact that the team in the negative chooses to focus on primarily the ecological side of the debate only and to reduce animals to mere units of production, to items on a menu and to their usefulness in terms of means to human ends, I think it shows a reluctance and perhaps a fear to engage on the ethical issues that arise from eating animals. So that's my first observation. And secondly, in response to the idea of choice and that we choose to eat vegetarian or vegan or we choose to eat meat, where is the choice in this debate for the animal that is factory farmed and that is produced? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there somebody who would like to, up the top there, who'd like to speak against the motion? Yes, up the top.
First of all, I think that the strawman argument about factory farming is a bit boring at an intelligent debate, because I can't think that there'd be anybody in this room who would actually be in favour of factory farming, and stand up if you are. I think that that's not what we came to debate, though. It's about whether meat should be on the menu or off the menu. And the questions about moral relativism and cultural relativism that we've all heard just now have also elided the role, although it's been canvassed briefly, elided the role of meat in the global south. And for us to sit here in our kind of luxurious first world lives and have a choice about vegetarianism, which I respect, I think is unconscionable to apply to others who don't have the same choices. And so if you're going to take the moral position, you need to be very careful about whether you're taking that position for others whose best source of nutrition might be the family pig that's in the field nearby, that's part of their agroecological system.
Okay, thank you. Speaking for the motion, yes.
I'd just like to make explicit, I think, a point that I think is implicit in what the animal ethicists have already said. That is that we're not carnivores. We eat meat by choice. Why would you choose to kill another animal and eat its flesh when you could choose not to? I think meat feeds much more than our body. I think eating meat feeds our ego. Because by choosing to eat meat, we are demonstrating that we are powerful enough to dominate and kill other animals for reasons other than survival. We demonstrate it through technology on a farm where animals are kept in cages, no matter how big or small. We demonstrate it through technology in an abattoir where animals are killed systematically by machines. Lastly and most importantly, we demonstrate it with our wallets, where we pay top dollar for prime steak as a display of wealth. We are not carnivores. We eat meat by choice, and we choose to eat it to feed our ego.
Yeah. Anybody down here who wants to speak against the motion? Yeah.
First, I guess a question for Veronica. Did you know that Yotam actually also eats meat and is a meat eater, and that his second book, Plenty, was all about vegetarianism, but in the sort of the foreword of the book, he actually talks about the fact that he enjoys eating meat, and that perhaps some people here aren't aware that one of your pin-up chefs, etc., is actually a carnivore. Are you aware of that fact?
I'm very aware of it. Yeah. He's made it very clear for many years that in fact he is a meat eater, but he's also a very inventive food writer, and that's why he was employed by The Guardian at a time when the readers wanted clever, exciting vegetarian food. But I'm certainly aware that he does eat meat. It's, the point I'm making is that his vegetarian recipes are really clever and creative and well worth looking at.
Okay, so you've got 32 seconds to go.
32 seconds. Okay, I guess question for all those on the force side. Have any of you bought a wool suit or wear leather shoes now in the last sort of 6 months?
I'd like to answer that for me.
Yep.
Many years ago, when I'm a merchant banker, I jetted around the world like some big shot. And my favorite food was filet mignon and lobster, a fact of which I'm so profoundly ashamed. Today, I don't consume any animal products. The shoes that I wear, my belt, even my watch band have no animal products in it. And I can now look in the mirror in the morning with a clear conscience.
Is there somebody up the top who wants to speak for the motion? Yes, and then we'll take...
So I guess that I feel like there were two arguments raised that I think were flawed and I think are often used in different moral debates. I think the first one is the idea that if something is natural and humans have done it historically, then it makes it okay. While this is maybe an intuitive thing that people like to nod their heads to, I think that, you can take, for example, the idea that women, naturally are supposed to raise their young kids just by the fact of breastfeeding. But today we have ways to go around that in the 21st century, and it allows women to enter the workforce, it allows women to do a whole range of things. So I think that just because something's natural, if we can choose to transcend it, and that gives people or sentient beings a better life, then I think that we should. I think the other important issue is that often it's talked about the fact that people lose their jobs if something's changed or the implications that that will have on workers. And I think as you can see with things like with the slavery industry, when that was first proposed to be banned, the amount of jobs lost was something considered. And I think that that should never really be a factor or a large factor, because ultimately as society changes, jobs in different areas will be lost. But for massive things like billions of animals a day, that shouldn't influence our actions more than the billions of animals that are killed.
Thank you. Okay, and just to be, because people have been waiting, I'll take the first speaker on each side here. You'll be the last two speakers, so I'm sorry for those who've missed out, but we need to do it. So one speaker each from this side, and you can sort it out amongst yourselves. The rest, I'm afraid, will have missed. So, yes.
I do not believe that it is appropriate to kill animals and put them on a grill and then smother barbecue sauce all over them, because how would you feel if that was you or your child or your sibling or even your mother? How would you feel if that was you? It's just treating animals a different way because they cannot talk and their only defence is simply the people who are vegetarian.
Okay. And the final floor speaker will be this gentleman.
I wish to respond to many claims made by those saying, those who are on the against side. But I think it all is summed up by the fact that in many things in life we have a win-win situation, and this is one of them. There's really nothing to be weighed up, and the idea that there is something to be weighed up usually is generated by those who profit from the thing that is causing the suffering. And that is certainly the case here. In terms of being natural to eat meat, well, I'd advise someone to try, if they can, to attack and bite a cow or another animal using only what they have now, their so-called eye teeth. Without tools, you can't do it. Without tools, you can't fly, and you can't do a whole lot of other things that humans are not naturally capable of doing. In terms of bacteria, well, the total weight of bacteria exceeds the weight of all other living things. They're not going to disappear without some cows. And it's worth noting that animals in the wild also produce excrement. And needless to say, in terms of biodiversity, cutting down trees and breaking up the topsoil, salinating the soil, then killing the animals on the soil and ultimately causing heart disease to the humans who eat the animals, needless to say, kills more animals than being a vegetarian or preferably vegan.
Thank you. No, you will in a minute. Yes, you will, but not right now. All right, two things are going to happen now because of the time. One is that people with ballot boxes are going to be coming forward to collect your votes. It's really important that you find your voting ticket because what you cast now by way of your ballot will determine the result of this argument. If you are still undecided, then leave it joined together and put it in the ballot box. Otherwise, tear it in half, for if you're with this side or against. Now, as people are summing up, you'll hear the speakers each being given 2 minutes to make some closing remarks. Because of the way in which Adrian needed to speak, I'll let him go first and we'll go in reverse order so that you can address issues, which means Peter will be finishing up. So please vote quietly, listen in to what people are having to say. Adrian Richardson, your 2 minutes begins now.
For me, this is a personal choice. I have no problem with the, when I've done this before, I've killed an animal. In fact, when I was 12 years old, my father, the vegetarian, who he was a vegetarian, took me out to the back paddock of the farm we were living on, and I shot my first sheep. We skun it, we gutted it, and we hung it in the cellar for a couple of days, wrapped in cloth. That's the way you tenderise it. My father sat me down a couple of days later when we ate the meat. And he said to me, Adrian, this is where meat comes from. An animal dies so that you can eat meat. It's your job to make sure you use every part of it and treat that animal with respect. And that's the way I've lived my life, and that's what I do. That's why I eat meat. I have no problem with it. The gentleman over there said that we can't kill an animal with our bare hands. Well, I've killed a few chickens and a few rabbits with my bare hands. You know, and if I was out in the wild, that's what I would do. But I have no problem with it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't have that problem at all. And if you have a problem with the death of an animal, then don't eat meat. I think it's a most noble thing. That's what I'm thinking.
Veronica, you'll be next. You've got 2 minutes. I'd also be interested in, Philip, just to give you some warning, one of the arguments that was put on the thing that from the floor was that this is not about factory farming, and I'd like if you could, when you make your comments, to remark on if there was no factory farming, would that in any way change your view? So just to have that on notice. Veronica, your 2 minutes begin now.
Okay. I was the editor of Epicure for 4 years, and that time I watched the expectations of readers and the quality of vegetarian and vegan food increased to the point where it became exciting and clever. These days, vegetarian food is delicious, whether we're talking about more sophisticated Epicurean dishes or staples that can be flavoured with plant-based proteins, pulses, seeds, nuts, spices and herbs. Plant products, I believe, provide us with the necessary nutrients a human needs, and research certainly shows that conclusively that it's healthier than a meat-based diet and better for the planet. The demand for ever cheaper food has led to the inhumane factory farming of animals. With this as the basis of my argument, I believe the avoidance of pain and suffering of any living being should be the main consideration when making culinary choices. Food should be a celebration. It unites families and nourishes the soul. It is one of the ways we can tell people we care about them. Before sitting down to our next meal, perhaps we should all consider acting on the knowledge that no being has to suffer and die for us to live and thrive.
Dr. Bruce McGregor.
Yes, I think it's important to remind members of the audience that crop production, which involves the ploughing of ground, completely destroys biodiversity. But take note that when a place has been ploughed up for years and years to produce any crop, there is no biodiversity left. It's also important to remember that irrigation systems destroy biodiversity and river systems. So that, again, using irrigation for crop production is a problem. An example of another sort of production system is soybean production in Brazil, where large areas of the Amazon rainforest are being destroyed to produce soybeans. There are at least 2 billion people who depend on animals for their food and livelihoods, which is underwritten to some extent by their value as meat. It's important to consider the welfare and ethics involved in this. Otherwise, one could be regarded as being purely selfish and perhaps misanthropic.
Many species of animal will benefit from proper studies of their management and biodiversity. At the moment, there's very little investment on a world scale in proper sustainable food production systems in natural and farm systems. There's a huge investment in military expenditure. It has been estimated 60% of the investment is in military issues and not into the things that we're concerned about today. So the future, really, of this debate is linked inextricably to the human population pressures. I mean, there's going to be 9 billion people producing methane every day. 150 years ago, it was less than 2 billion. The issues with farmed animal production and methane need to be put in the context of the huge numbers of native animals that have been wiped out. As one of the speakers mentioned earlier, cattle have been replacing native ecosystems.
Philip Wollen.
Simon, I'll answer your question as long as it doesn't come into my response time.
Okay.
It'll only take me a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
I completely disagree with factory farming. Most of the animals, the meat that we consume today, comes out of factory farms. Plain and simple. Anyone who tells you otherwise is disingenuous, to say the very least. And I'm just surprised at the...
But if there was no factory farming in the world...
Yes.
None at all?
Yes.
Would it change your attitude to the eating of meat?
It would not change my attitude in the slightest.
Right. Okay, that's what I wanted to have. Okay, to your statement.
I'd like everyone here to just imagine another world. A clean, peaceful environment, healthy people, no cruelty, no killing, no screams. What type of person, some bright spark would come up and say, let's capture, cage, impregnate, torture and kill all the animals. Let's eat their rotting corpses and make our bodies a graveyard for murder victims. What would you say to someone who came up with that brilliant idea? Well, if no one here would invent such an industry, what kind of person would defend it? I guess I know the answer. Upton Sinclair said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Now, during this debate, while we've been having this debate, 30 million animals have been murdered. So, as I say, I was a meat eater until I saw the atrocities committed against these powerless animals. Cruelty, if inflicted on a puppy or a kitten, would have landed the offender in prison for a long time. But if it's on a factory farm, it's okay. See, as I traveled around the world many years ago, I realized there were hundreds of animals I didn't eat. Dogs or cats, bears or bats, horses or hamsters, rosellas or rats. I ate none of them. So I simply added 5 animals to the list. Cows, sheep, chickens, pigs and fish. I've never felt better. So, I would say feeding a child meat is tantamount to tossing him a pack of Marlboros. The last sentence of Scott Fitzgerald's book reads, so we beat on, boats against the tide, drawn back ceaselessly into the past. I ask you, are we to live forever in a sick, smug and cruel past? The brutes and the bullies have been Goliath, but David is coming. Maybe he's in this room, maybe he's one of you. And if not you, who? And if not now, when?
Fiona Chambers.
There's not one of us on this panel that is here that has tried to defend factory farming. That's not been what the argument's been about. You are not correct in saying that just about all meat is from factory farming in Australia. In Australia, the situation is different, and we've only got 6% of arable land, and the vast majority of that is extensively grazed on low-impact, environmentally sustainable systems. Not all of it, and I'm not defending the part that's not sustainable, but it's not true to say that most livestock is from intensive situations. here in the beef situation. In terms of humane slaughter, it's been said that it's not possible to slaughter animals humanely, and that's not true. It's not true because I've seen and witnessed, I've seen bad slaughters and I've seen good slaughters, and animals can be slaughtered. They can be slaughtered without pain and without suffering, and it's our absolute responsibility to ensure that that happens every time if we're going to be slaughtering animals. Nothing less than that is acceptable, and I'm the first to agree with that. But this debate was not about whether or not it's possible to slaughter animals humanely, because that in itself is not a reason for why animals should not be on the menu or whether they should be on the menu. Just to say it's possible to kill them humanely is not reason enough. But to use animals in a sustainable system to build soil is a reason to keep animals on the menu.
Thank you. Peter, if you could, a question that was asked from up the back, which you might address just before you use your 2 minutes, was to do with whether or not adequate consideration has been given to people from other parts of the world and other cultures where the eating of animals for them may be their best source of sustenance. So is this a precious argument amongst people who are affluent to the extreme in comparison to them?
Well, certainly, I think that I interpret the question as a choice for us, and we have choices. I did not think we were talking about whether animals should be off the menu for example, hunter-gatherer people in the Amazon, or people living in arid grasslands in Africa where they graze cattle and that's basically their major source of food. I'm certainly not going to stand here and say you have to put animals off your menu, even though that means that you and your children will starve. I think the ethical issue is one for us who can walk into a store and either buy meat or buy some equally or more nutritious plant-based foods. I think that's the case where I would argue that animals should be off the menu.
Now, do you want your 2 minutes now to do your summary?
Okay, thank you. So, firstly, let me say on this point about are we talking about factory farming or not, if we're not talking about factory farming, then animals will be largely off the menu because we won't be able to supply the amount of meat that people are eating now from the kinds of farms that we're talking about. I mean, I think Adrian said that people should buy Fiona Chambers' pork. Well, how many? I don't know if you can feed even this audience, let alone all the people out there. And there may be other organic farmers who are trying to do the right thing by their animals, but it is still a very small niche market. I'd like to see it expand, I suppose, at the cost of the factory farms. That would be certainly better than the factory farms continuing. I'd welcome that to that extent. But really, we can't sustain the kind of meat eating that we have in the society from these small organic farms. That's sad, but it's the truth of the matter. Now, Bruce talked about crop production, but the fact is, and the damage it can do to the environment, but the fact is that we would need much less of it if we were not feeding crops to animals. He mentioned the Brazilian soybean production, but I think 70 or 80% of that is fed to animals. So that's exactly the problem. And even with beef in Australia, 80% of the beef sold in supermarkets has ended its life in feedlots. So we are feeding grain. We don't do quite as much of it as the United States, it's true, but we are still feeding grain to the cattle, to the beef that is the majority of the beef that is produced in Australia. Finally, I want to say something about this issue of slaughter. I welcome the fact that Fiona Chambers is concerned about the suffering and cruelty. She says that it should be humane every time. The problem is that in a commercial slaughterhouse, you make money by processing more animals. There's a book called Every 12 Seconds. That's how long in a particular slaughterhouse where this man worked every 12 seconds another animal was being killed. You just cannot keep up the humane standards reliably when you're under constant pressure to kill more animals faster. So if we want commercial slaughter, there are going to be cases of cruelty. You'll never make sure that it's all humane.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I have the tally of the pre-debate poll and the votes you just cast there, but before I open up the envelope and see what's happened, I'd just like to thank a few people. To our partners here, the people from the Wheeler Centre who brought us all together, fantastic people from the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival. I'm sure many of you are here because of their advocacy for a discussion about this topic. The staff and management of the Town Hall, the volunteers who've conducted this ballot, all of them out there busily counting, the editor and management of The Age, who are a partner we've had now for 3 years, the Mayor Alderman and officers of the City of Melbourne, the Managing Director and staff of the ABC and our supporters, AMP. The next debate is on the topic, and it's on the 8th of May, that freedom of speech is overrated. And I suppose it's a hard argument to advance given what we've been doing tonight. But before I even give you the results, whatever the result is, would you join with me in thanking Peter Singer, Fiona Chambers, Philip Wollen, Bruce McGregor, Veronica Ridge and Adrian Richardson. It's whatever you think about this, it's amazing to think that, I don't think we would have got this many people 15 or 20 years ago for a topic about this. It's extraordinary the way in which the consciousness of this issue has been changed over the last few years. But you're not interested in my rambling reflections on that, are you? It's what happened in the debate. Well, here are the figures when you were surveyed coming in. The results were that there were 65% of people for the motion, 22.5% against, and 12.5% of you were undecided. At the end of the debate, the undecided has reduced to 6.9%. The against side has declined to 19.3%, which means it's been won with a whopping margin of 73.6% by the affirmative. Finally, thank you to all of you for coming along tonight, for your support, and I now declare the debate to be closed.